On a damp morning in Chatham, Ontario, on November 12, 2024, Arif Siddiqui stood behind the counter of Siddiqui Electronics, his small retail shop, arranging a display of phone chargers, the faint buzz of fluorescent lights mixing with the hum of a coffee maker in the corner. At 47, Arif, a Pakistani Canadian, was a compact man with salt and pepper hair and a reserved smile that hid the fatigue of his daily routine. Chatham, a city of 44,000 nestled in the flatlands of southwestern Ontario, was a patchwork of historic brick buildings, sprawling farms, and strip malls. Arif had moved here 7 years ago with his wife Rabia, 44, a part-time office administrator, and their 2 children, Noor, 16, and Hamza, 13, chasing a quieter life after Toronto's grind. But the town's small-town charm carried a subtle sting, one Arif felt as a brown-skinned Muslim in a mostly white community. Siddiqui Electronics, a narrow storefront on King Street, was Arif's lifeline, its shelves stocked with smartphones, earbuds, and repair kits. The shop, with its handwritten sales signs and a small prayer rug tucked in the back, was a family effort. Rabia handled bookkeeping, Noor restocked after school, and Hamza cleaned displays. But prejudice lingered like dust in the corners. Customers like Ron Harper, a white mechanic, often questioned Arif's prices, saying, "These gadgets seem steep for Chatham," his tone edged with doubt. Suppliers like Tom Reynolds at Ontario Tech Distributors delivered late, citing routing issues that didn't affect other stores. Last week, a client, a white woman in her 50s, had bypassed Arif to ask a part-time white employee, Sarah, about a laptop, muttering, "I want someone who knows tech." Arif stayed calm, needing the sales, but each slight was a pebble in his shoe, grinding with every step. Today, as Arif tested a refurbished phone, Ron walked in, his work boots tracking mud. "Arif, this charger you sold me fried my phone," he said, tossing a tangled cord on the counter, his eyes narrowing. "You checking your stock?" Arif's jaw tightened. He'd tested every unit himself. "It's brand name, Ron. Let's troubleshoot. No charge." Ron's smirk said he wasn't convinced. "Better be legit. I don't like dodgy stuff." The word dodgy was a jab, a code Arif knew. Pakistani, Muslim, not trustworthy. He swapped the charger, confirmed the phone's issue was user error, and fixed it free, but Ron paid exact change, muttering, "Hope it works this time." At lunch, Arif ate paratha Rabia had packed, sitting alone in the shop's back room, the faint scent of cumin a brief tether to home. His friend Asif, a Bangladeshi Canadian tailor nearby, texted, "Ron hassling you again?" Arif replied, "Same old, you?" Asif's response was grim. "Customer said my stitches look foreign," smiled it off. Arif sighed, their shared weight heavy. Rabia faced it too, colleagues at her admin job overlooking her for tasks, citing communication gaps despite her clear English. Noor, at school, had mentioned a classmate, Ethan, shunning her in group assignments, whispering weird. Hamza overheard Ethan's Paki jab at soccer. Arif taught them to hold their heads high, but the pebbles were piling. That afternoon, Arif visited the Chatham Chamber of Commerce, hoping to join their vendor list for bulk tech sales to local businesses. The coordinator, Karen Ellis, a white woman in her 50s, reviewed his application with a tight smile. "We're selective," she said, her tone clipped. "Our clients prefer established vendors." The word established was a wall, and Arif saw it in their glances. Ron was there, chatting with Karen, others avoiding his eyes. He left, rejected, the chamber's closed circle a silent barrier that cost him a potential $3,000 monthly contract. At home, a modest house on La Croix Street, Arif grilled kebabs while Noor studied. Rabia, sorting invoices, spoke softly. "The office manager reassigned my project," she said they need someone more familiar with clients. Arif's heart sank. The pattern was clear. Ron's customer bias, Tom's late deliveries, Karen's gatekeeping, Ethan's school slights. Hamza said his soccer coach benched him, citing team flow, Ethan's role secure. Noor was overlooked for a school leadership role, Ethan chosen instead. "We're like shadows here," Rabia whispered, her voice trembling. "They look right through us." On November 13th, the exclusion deepened. Arif met a local school board, hoping to supply tablets for a tech program, but the director, tied to Karen, declined, citing preferred suppliers. At school, Noor's presentation was skipped, Ethan's prioritized, the teacher citing time constraints. Hamza's teammates excluded him from a play, Ethan's outsider jab unchecked. Rabia's admin job cut her hours, the manager citing budget priorities. "It's a cage," Arif said, his voice low. "No threats, just bars." That night, Arif and Rabia sat in their living room, their ledgers open, the faint glow of a lamp casting long shadows. "We push back," Rabia said, her eyes fierce. "We find our own way." Arif nodded, his resolve hardening, though fear lingered. They were Pakistani Canadians, their shop a flicker of hope, but Sarnia's silence was a heavy shroud, and their fight was just beginning. On November 14th, 2024, Arif Siddiqui stood behind the counter of Siddiqui Electronics, his small shop on King Street in Chatham, Ontario, his hands steady as he tested a pair of wireless earbuds, though his mind churned with the weight of the past few days. The faint hum of the shop's fluorescent lights and the occasional clink of a coffee mug in the corner were drowned out by the steady drip of prejudice that seeped into his life. At 47, Arif, a Pakistani Canadian, felt the sting of exclusion like a dull ache. Customers like Ron Harper questioning his prices with coded jabs, supplier Tom Reynolds delaying deliveries, and a rejected bid to join the Chatham Chamber of Commerce's vendor list. Chatham's brick-lined streets, with their quaint storefronts and autumn-dappled trees, hid a venom that pushed his family, wife Rabia, 44, daughter Noor, 16, and son Hamza, 13, to the margins of the city of 44,000, threatening their shop and their sense of belonging. Rabia, sorting receipts at a small desk in the shop's back room, looked up, her office administrator's eyes sharp despite the fatigue etched into her face. "I found a new supplier in Windsor," she said, her voice low but resolute, referencing a contact from their friend Asif, a Bangladeshi Canadian tailor. "They'll ship cables next week, cheaper than Reynolds." Arif nodded, his throat tight, a flicker of relief tempered by the ever-present dread. Them, Ron, chamber coordinator Karen Ellis, Tom, and their network, weren't leaving threatening notes or breaking glass, but their barriers were just as real: customer distrust, late shipments, and school slights against Noor and Hamza. The shop's shelves were thinning, sales down 30%, and every transaction felt like a test of endurance, their fight woven into the quiet rhythm of Chatham's daily grind. The shop was emptier now, the exclusion's shadow chasing customers away. Regulars like Mrs. Carter, who once bought phone cases weekly, now shopped at a chain store on St. Clair Street, citing better selection, a veiled excuse for bias. New clients were rare, deterred by murmurs, spread by Ron and his circle, that Siddiqui Electronics sold questionable goods. At 1 p.m., Noor arrived from school, her backpack heavy with textbooks, her hands moving quickly to restock USB drives. "Dad, my science group didn't use my research," she said, her voice barely audible, her eyes fixed on the shelf to mask the hurt. "Ethan said it was too complicated." Arif's stomach twisted. Ethan's complicated was a jab at Noor's Pakistani heritage, a dismissal of her meticulous data on renewable energy. "You're smarter than them, Noor," Arif said, his voice firm but heavy with a father's pain, his hands pausing on a box of chargers. Noor's shoulders slumped, her reply soft. "It's Ethan's dad, isn't it? He's with Ron." Arif nodded, the pattern as clear as the dust motes in the shop's fluorescent glow. Ron's client prejudice, Tom's delays, Karen's gatekeeping, Ethan's taunts at Noor's school. A web of rejection spun with polite smiles and vague excuses. That afternoon, Arif drove to a meeting with a local real estate office, hoping to supply laptops for their staff, a $2,500 deal that could ease the shop's financial strain. The manager, a friend of Karen's named Linda, sat in a sleek office overlooking Chatham's downtown, her desk cluttered with property listings and a framed photo of a lakeside cottage. Arif presented his catalog, competitive prices, warranties, same-day delivery, but Linda's smile was thin, her eyes flicking to his name tag. "We're loyal to our current supplier," she said, her tone final. Arif pressed, citing his shop's 5-star reviews and certified products, but Linda's gaze drifted to the window. "It's about familiarity," she added, the word heavy with implication. Arif left, the deal lost, The shop's finances now a $4,000 monthly shortfall, each rejection a weight that pressed harder on his chest. Back at the shop, Rabia shared her own setback. "The office cut my hours again," she said, her voice low, her hands pausing over a ledger. "They said they need someone more client-facing. That's 3 cuts this month." Arif's heart sank. The pattern was relentless, a coordinated squeeze from Karen's network, Ron's social circle, and their allies. At school, Hamza faced a new slight. His soccer coach reassigned him to a reserve spot, citing team unity, while Ethan, a weaker player, kept his position. "Ethan laughed," Hamza said, his voice bitter, rubbing a bruise from a stray kick at practice. Noor's teacher overlooked her for a math competition, choosing Ethan, claiming leadership qualities, despite Noor's perfect scores. "They don't see us," Rabia whispered, her eyes glistening as she stood by the counter, the shop's silence deafening. "We're just there." On November 15th, the exclusion deepened. Arif met a local car dealership hoping to supply dash cams for their vehicles, but the owner tied to Ron declined, citing brand consistency. Arif's offer, bulk discounts, free installation, was ignored, the owner's glance at his beard a quiet verdict. At home, Rabia faced a new blow. A 4th client dropped her, emailing, "We need someone who aligns with our community." Hamza's teammates froze him out during a scrimmage. Ethan's pocky jab a low hiss, unchecked by the coach. Noor's group project was graded lower than Ethan's identical work, the teacher citing clarity issues, despite her polished slides. "It's like we're fading," Arif said, his voice low, his hands clenching a coffee mug as he sat in the shop's back room. The faint scent of chai, a bitter reminder of home. That evening, Arif and Rabia lingered in the shop after closing, the fluorescent lights casting long shadows across the shelves. Noor and Hamza joined, their school bags slumped by the door, their faces heavy with the day's slights. "We keep going," Rabia said, her voice fierce, though her hands trembled as she straightened a display. "We don't let them push us out." Arif nodded, his resolve a flickering flame, though fear gnawed at him. The shop had 6 weeks of cash left and every door seemed bolted shut. They were Pakistani Canadians, their roots deep, but Chatham's silence was a heavy fog, and their fight was a quiet, desperate struggle to be seen. The morning of November 16, 2024, draped Chatham, Ontario in a heavy fog, the damp air clinging to the brick facades of King Street, where Arif Siddiqui stood behind the counter of Siddiqui Electronics, his small shop now a battleground of quiet endurance. At 47, Arif, a Pakistani Canadian, felt the weight of exclusion like a stone in his chest, each day grinding harder. Customers like Ron Harper dismissing his expertise with veiled jabs, supplier Tom Reynolds stalling deliveries, and the Chatham Chamber of Commerce slamming its doors on his vendor application. The shop's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sterile glow on shelves that grew sparser by the week, a stark reminder of the silent venom that seeped through this city of 44,000, marginalizing his family. Wife Rabia, 44, daughter Noor, 16, and son Hamza, 13, through whispers, glances, and bolted gates. Arif adjusted a display of phone cases, his hands steady despite the tremor of exhaustion in his limbs, his salt and pepper hair damp from the fog he'd walked through to open the shop at 8 a.m. Rabia sat at a small desk in the back, her fingers pausing over a calculator, her part-time office administrator's eyes scanning a ledger that showed sales down 40%. The shop's finances, a tightrope stretched over a $5,000 monthly shortfall. "Asif's contact in Windsor sent a partial shipment," she said, her voice low but resolute, referring to their Bangladeshi Canadian tailor friend. "Enough cables for a week, but Reynolds is still holding our main order." Arif nodded, his throat constricting, a fleeting spark of relief snuffed by the ever-present dread. Them, Ron, chamber coordinator Karen Ellis, Tom, and their network, weren't scrawling slurs or smashing windows, but their barriers were a slow, deliberate choke, customer distrust, delayed stock, and school slights that cut at Noor and Hamza like 1,000 paper cuts. Every transaction, every interaction was a test, their fight woven into the fabric of Chatham's ordinary days. The shop was a ghost of its former self, the exclusion's frost driving away even loyal customers. Mrs. Lawson, who once bought earbuds monthly, now shopped at a big-box store on Grand Avenue, citing more options, a polite dodge for bias. New clients were scarce, deterred by rumors, spread by Ron and his ilk, that Siddiqui Electronics was overpriced or unreliable. At 1:30 p.m., Noor shuffled in from school, her scarf loose around her shoulders, her eyes avoiding Arif's as she restocked batteries. "Dad, my English teacher didn't call on me," she said, her voice barely audible, her hands fumbling with a package. "Ethan answered, even when I raised my hand." Arif's gut twisted. Ethan's preference was a jab at Noor's Pakistani heritage, a dismissal of her articulate insights on literature. "You're sharper than him, Noor," Arif said, his voice firm but laced with a father's ache, his hands pausing on a stack of USB drives. Noor's lips pressed thin, her reply a whisper. "It's Ethan's dad, isn't it? He's with Karen." Arif nodded, the pattern as clear as the smudges on the shop's glass door. Ron's client bias, Tom's delays, Karen's gatekeeping, Ethan's taunts at Noor's school, a web of rejection spun with nods and shrugs. That afternoon, Arif walked to a nearby trucking depot, a squat building off Keel Drive, hoping to pitch repair services for their GPS units, a $2,000 deal that could ease the shop's strain. The manager, a burly man named Frank, tied to Ron's drinking buddies, sat behind a desk cluttered with coffee cups and route maps, his eyes skimming Arif's flyer, bulk discounts, certified repairs, before pushing it aside. "We're good with our guy," Frank said, his tone flat, his glance at Arif's name tag a silent verdict. Arif pressed, citing his shop's quick turnaround and 5-star reviews, but Frank's smile was a wall. "It's about knowing the business," he said, the word knowing heavy with implication. Arif left, the deal lost, the shop's finances teetering closer to collapse, each rejection a pebble added to the pile threatening to bury them. Back at the shop, Rabia shared her own blow. "The office reassigned my reports again," she said, her voice low, her hands gripping a pen until her knuckles paled. "They said they need someone more client-friendly. That's 5 tasks this month." Arif's heart sank. The pattern was a relentless drumbeat, a coordinated squeeze from Karen's network, Ron's social circle, and their allies. At school, Hamza faced another slight. His soccer coach cut his practice time, citing team cohesion, while Ethan, a slower player, kept full drills. "Ethan tripped me," Hamza said, his voice tight, showing a scrape from a missed tackle. Noor's math teacher overlooked her for a quiz team, choosing Ethan, claiming competitive readiness despite Noor's top scores. "They're wiping us out," Rabia whispered, her eyes glistening as she stood by the counter, the shop's silence a weight that pressed on their shoulders. On November 17th, the exclusion grew sharper. Ari visited a local community college, hoping to supply headphones for their media lab, but the purchasing officer linked to Karen declined, citing preferred vendors. Arif's offer, 20% off, free setup, was ignored. The officer's glance at his beard a quiet dismissal. At home, Rabia faced a new hit. Her admin job reduced her to 1 shift a week, the manager citing staff optimization. Hamza's teammates excluded him from a team dinner, Ethan's weird jab a low hiss, unchecked by the coach. Noor's group project was downgraded, Ethan's identical work praised, the teacher citing team contribution. "It's like we're air," Arif said, his voice low, his hands clenching a mug as he sat in the shop's back room, the faint scent of chai now, sour with defeat. That evening, Arif and Rabia lingered in the shop after closing, the shelves half empty, the coffee maker cold. Noor and Hamza sat nearby, their schoolwork untouched, their faces heavy with the day's wounds. "We keep moving," Rabia said, her voice fierce, though her hands shook as she folded a receipt. "We don't vanish." Arif nodded, his resolve a fraying thread, the shop's cash reserves down to a month. They were Pakistani Canadians, their roots a quiet strength, but Chatham's fog was a shroud, and their fight was a desperate grasp for light in the haze. On November 18th, 2024, Arif Siddiqui stood behind the counter of Siddiqui Electronics, his small shop on King Street in Chatham, Ontario, his hands steady as he soldered a cracked phone screen, the faint hiss of the soldering iron a quiet rhythm against the storm that had battered his family for weeks. At 47, Arif, a Pakistani Canadian, carried the weight of exclusion like a second skin. Customers like Ron Harper dismissing his expertise with coded jabs, supplier Tom Reynolds choking their stock with delays, and the Chatham Chamber of Commerce barring them from its vendor list. The shop's fluorescent lights flickered, casting a pale glow on shelves that teetered on empty, a stark reminder of the venom weaving through this city of 44,000, marginalizing his family, wife Rabia, 44, daughter Noor, 16, and son Hamza, 13, through whispers, glances, and doors slammed shut. Yet, in the grind of daily life, a fragile thread of resilience held them together, their fight unfolding not in grand gestures, but in the stubborn act of showing up. Rabia, tallying sales at a small desk in the back, her part-time office administrator's fingers pausing over a calculator, looked up, her eyes heavy but unyielding. Asif's friend in Windsor sent extra cables, she said, her voice soft but resolute, referencing their Bangladeshi-Canadian tailor ally. Enough to cover the weekend, and Mrs. Patel bought a charger today. Arif nodded, his throat tight, a flicker of relief drowned by the dread that clung like damp to his bones. The shop's revenue was down 50%, its cash reserves a mere 4 weeks from depletion, and every sale was a lifeline. Them, Ron, chamber coordinator Karen Ellis, Tom, and their network weren't shouting slurs or breaking glass, but their barriers were a slow, deliberate squeeze, customer distrust, stalled deliveries, and school slights that cut at Noor and Hamza, like a blade honed by indifference. Their struggle was no planned campaign, just the raw, unscripted push to keep breathing in Chatham's fog-laden air. The shop was a hollow echo of its former bustle, the exclusion's chill driving away even the steadiest patrons. Mrs. Evans, who once bought batteries weekly, now shopped at a chain on Richmond Street citing better warranties, a thinly veiled bias. New clients were ghosts scared off by rumors spread by Ron and his circle that Siddiqui Electronics was sketchy. At 2 p.m., Noor trudged in from school, her scarf tucked into her coat, her hands sluggish as she sorted earbuds. "Dad, my history teacher gave Ethan my project slot," she said, her voice flat, her eyes fixed on the shelf to hide the sting. Said his topic was more relevant. Arif's gut churned. Ethan's relevance was a jab at Noor's Pakistani heritage, a dismissal of her research on South Asian diaspora. "You're brighter than him, Noor," Arif said, his voice firm but cracking with a father's pain, his hands pausing on a stack of phone cases. Noor's lips trembled, her reply a whisper. "It's Ethan's dad, isn't it?" "He's with Karen." Arif nodded, the pattern as clear as the smudges on the shop's counter. Ron's client prejudice, Tom's delays, Karen's gatekeeping, Ethan's taunts at Noor's school, a web of rejection spun with nods and half smiles. That afternoon, Arif walked to a local insurance office, a low brick building off Wellington Street, hoping to supply tablets for their staff, a $1,800 deal that could buy a week's grace. The manager, tied to Karen's network, listened to Arif's pitch, bulk discounts, free setup, her eyes skimming his flyer before sliding it back. "We're set with our vendor," she said, her tone curt, her glance at Arif's name tag a silent verdict. Arif pressed, citing his shop's reliability and certified products, but her smile was a wall. "It's about trust," she said, the word a blade. Arif left, the deal lost, the shop's finances a $6,000 monthly shortfall, each rejection a stone piling higher on their crumbling foundation. Back at the shop, Rabia shared another wound. "The office cut me to 1 day a week," she said, her voice low, her hands gripping a pen until it bent. "They said they need someone more visible to clients." Arif's heart sank. The pattern was a relentless tide, washing away their stability. At school, Hamza faced a fresh blow. His soccer coach excluded him from a starting lineup, citing team spirit, while Ethan, a mediocre player, kept his spot. "Ethan elbowed me," Hamza said, his voice tight, showing a bruise from a missed play. Noor's teacher downgraded her essay, praising Ethan's similar work, claiming better structure, despite Noor's meticulous draft. "They're erasing us," Rabia whispered, her eyes glistening as she stood by the counter, the shop's silence a weight that crushed their breath. On November 19th, the exclusion grew sharper still. Arif visited a local farm supply store, hoping to supply battery packs for their equipment, but the owner, linked to Ron, declined, citing long-term partners. Arif's offer, 10% off, same-day delivery, was ignored. The owner's glance at his beard, a quiet dismissal. At home, Rabia faced a new hit. Her admin job eliminated her last shift, the manager citing restructuring. Hamza's teammates shunned him at practice. Ethan's packy jab a low hiss unchecked by the coach. Noor's science fair entry was sidelined. Ethan's project showcased, the teacher citing broader appeal. "It's like we're nothing," Arif said, his voice low, his hands clenching a mug as he sat in the shop's back room, the faint scent of chai now a bitter echo of home. Yet in the unscripted flow of their days, small cracks of light appeared. On November 20th, Miss Patel, the Indian-Canadian nurse, returned to the shop, buying 2 chargers and lingering to chat. "You're good people," she said, her voice warm, promising to send her colleagues. Her purchase, though small, was a spark, a reminder that not all of Chatham was closed to them. That evening, a regular Mr. Thompson, an older white man who'd always been kind, bought a refurbished phone, tipping extra. "You do solid work, Arif," he said, his nod a rare affirmation. At school, Noor's math substitute teacher, unaware of Ethan's sway, praised her quiz answer, giving her a moment to shine. Hamza's assistant coach, new to the team, gave him extra drill time, bypassing Ethan's antics. Rabia, picking up a shift at a friend's office in Windsor, earned a $200 bonus, enough to cover a week's groceries. These were not victories, not plans, just fleeting moments of grace in the grind. The shop's shelves were still sparse, the bank account a ticking clock, and Chatham's fog thicker than ever. But Arif and Rabia clung to them, their family a quiet fortress. On November 21st, they sat in their La Croix Street kitchen, the glow of a single lamp casting soft shadows, Noor and Hamza beside them, their schoolwork open but untouched. "We don't fade," Rabia said, her voice fierce, her hands steady as she poured chai. Arif nodded, his resolve a worn but unbroken thread, the shop's future a coin toss. They were Pakistani Canadians, their roots a silent strength, their fight a stubborn refusal to vanish. Siddiqui Electronics was theirs, a flicker in the haze, and in its hum, they found a whisper of hope, a story to share, to carry, to let echo through every silence, a spark no exclusion could snuff.